Hello, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. Over the next half an hour, we're going to see what's making the headlines with a contributing editor for Novara Media, Moya Lothian-Mclean, and broadcaster and former government minister, Soubry. Right, let's take a look at the front pages ahead of Monday morning. We'll start with the Metro. It references another name for nitrous oxide, hippie crack, in its coverage of the government's announcement that it intends to ban laughing gas in an attempt to tackle antisocial behaviour. On the front of the Telegraph, reports that the Prime Minister is to launch a crackdown on begging as he announces this war on antisocial behaviour. The Express reports that would-be Conservative rebels are urging the PM to close every legal loophole that would allow bodies like the European Court of Human Rights to quash the deportation of migrants from the United Kingdom. Staying on the subject of migration, The Eye has the headline, Sunak moves to calm Tory nerves ahead of crunch vote on small boats. The Guardian has seen an internal NHS document suggesting that the health service is currently running with 154,000 fewer staff than is necessary to operate properly, and that figure could exceed 570,000 by 2036. The Times leads with a report that raw sewage was dumped into rivers and coastal areas across England more than 300,000 times last year, despite a fall in the overall number of spills. The global edition of the FT carries a warning from the International Monetary Fund that recent difficulties for banks around the world are posing a threat to overall financial stability. And the Star predicts very heavy rain in the coming days. For many of us, that has already arrived. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you are seeing on your screen right now during this programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us talk about them. Well, as I said, we're joined tonight by Moya Lothian-Mclean and Soubry. And good evening to you both. Right, we're not going to talk about the rain. We might come to that later. We were discussing that in the break. So much for the start of British summertime. We will start, though, with laughing gas, the ban that's been announced by the government today. It's on a number of the front pages, including The Guardian. You can see it there on the right-hand column of the front page. The sale of nitrous oxide or laughing gas will be banned. And Anna, a lot of people are picking up on this, saying, look, there are already laws to protect people from the harmful effects of drugs like laughing gas. So this seems to be a headline grabber from the government. How are you viewing this? Is this a good thing or a step too far?
I think it is a headline grabber. I mean, it is quite extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, obviously, Sophie Ridge was interviewing Michael Gove. Here we have it on the front page. It's on the front page of The Guardian. It's on the front page of the Metro as well. And this gas is going to be banned because apparently it's part of government crackdown on antisocial behaviour. And they've obviously sort of looked around for any drugs that they can possibly sort of focus on to get this sort of headline, hippie crackdown, because apparently it's called hippie crack. And, you know, can you imagine how shocked this government is going to be when it finds out that actually it's been in power for the last 13 years? I'm afraid I am horribly cynical about all of this. And I just think it's a dog whistle because they have been in power 13 years. I have no experience whatsoever of laughing gas. I've never come across it.
Have you not seen the silver canisters on the pavement, Anna? Because that's the sort of sign to people that have never used it or seen people using it. It's the little silver canisters, you know, in the drains and in the gutter on roads. Never seen them?
And balloons.
Yeah,
honestly,
and the balloons as well.
I mean, I walk through Nottingham, Derby, Lincoln and Leicester city centres on a fairly regular basis. Maybe I don't go to the right places. Yeah. But anyway, it's a problem.
Maybe you're too busy looking up, Anna, rather than looking down at the ground. Moya,
maybe it's a problem where Michael Gove goes.
Moya, what's your view on this? Because the government, you know, their advisory council on the misuse of drugs, that they, you know, ask for advice on this. They actually advise against new laws to ban nitrous oxide, saying that it would actually do more harm than good. And a lot of people have pointed out, as I said, that there are laws in place to prevent this. We mentioned the silver canisters. It's already illegal to litter. It's already illegal to produce or supply this gas for its psychoactive effects. This would mainly focus on possession. So anyone being found, you know, it's the most one of the most commonly used drugs between the ages of 16 and 24. Anyone found to be in possession of this could get a criminal record.
Yeah, I think what you have to understand this particular policy in the context of is this wider sort of crackdown on what they call antisocial behaviour. We've seen this before, and we've seen who it primarily criminalises, which is young people, people who fall outside of the social parameters set by whatever administration is in charge. So the other story that is in line with this is the one about begging. And as part of the begging story, people who present a public nuisance, who gets to decide that, when begging in public, will also find themselves criminalised. And when we see these sort of policies, they ignore the root causes of what we know as antisocial behaviour. Something like laughing gas, etc., young kids gathering, doing this on the street. All of these things are more symptoms of a lack of spaces to go, a lack of structure within their lives, a lack of places where young people can gather and hang out. So they're forced instead onto the streets. They're forced into doing these sort of activities in public spaces, and more groups that would never usually mix or coalesce are finding themselves in the same space. And you're getting this real war between, you know, say, young upwardly mobile professionals and young children who in previous years might have been elsewhere. And when the government criminalises people like children, what we see instead of I guess positive inaction of policies that would perhaps stop them doing laughing gas is things like children falling afoul of the police. We had the news yesterday that over nearly 3,000 children have been strip searched by police in the last 4 years alone. However, half of those took place without an appropriate adult in place. Strip searches, for those who are unaware, are so violating and traumatic, but the increasing criminalisation of young people for just being young people is going to result in more of that. And I see this policy as, once again, the government flailing around, looking for punitive solutions to a crisis that has of their own making. It's 13 years of austerity, as Anna referenced, that has led to this shrinking of spaces where young people can go and instead push them out into the open streets. So what we're going to get from antisocial behaviour policies is not a reduction in what we call antisocial behaviour, but instead the further criminalisation of people who are already vulnerable and already fall on the wrong side of the law.
Let's move on to the front page of the Eye. Sunak moves to calm Tory nerves ahead of a crunch vote on small boats. The government is facing a rebellion by up to 60 Tory right-wingers who want to toughen up its flagship illegal migration bill as it hits the Commons tomorrow. Anna, your view on this?
Well, I think this is actually quite interesting in the sense that Sunak is determined he's going to put through this appropriately named illegal migration bill. But his rebellion at the moment is not from the more sensible wing of the Conservative Party. I would say it's from those who are inhabiting the nationalist, more they are more right-wing part of the Conservative Party. And they seem to want to impose every single law that they can in order to prevent any form of appeal by people once they've arrived in the United Kingdom. And they seem that is where Sunak's rebellion is going to be, not from the more sensible wing of the party, in my opinion, the more balmy side of the party. And this is a problem for him. And he's got to quell that rebellion. I think he'd still get his bill or parts of it through, but they're going to put forward amendments which presumably Labour would vote against. So he shouldn't lose those votes. But it's interesting to see that this is where his focus is going to be, is on his own rebellion, but from that part of the Conservative Party. And it's a big number as well. I think it's somewhere in the region of 60, if not more, members of Parliament, or Conservative members of Parliament.
Yes, on the front page of the Daily Express, Tory rebels fight to close migrant loophole. Moya, that's the thing, isn't it? This illegal migration bill, the big concern about what Rishi Sunak and the Home Secretary want to do with it is that it won't actually come to fruition because of the legal challenges. And this is Tory rebels saying, you know, you have to make this tight. There can be no wiggle room. We don't want any interference from any courts.
Yeah, one of the policies they're trying to, one of the amendments they're trying to pass is that domestic courts will no longer be able to block the removal of migrants to places like Rwanda, for example. It's just fascinating that the illegal migration bill is meant to be referencing irregular migration routes, which are not illegal, by the way, when in fact the thing that it's trying to do is very, very illegal according to all existing conventions and agreements we have around the treatment of refugees and human rights. And what is fascinating is this backbench rebellion will never be satisfied. It will never be satisfied unless the UK asylum system is closed altogether to anyone coming in. And when you look at the policies that they're putting forward, the amendments they're putting forward, it is nothing to do with a fair system, as Rishi Sunak and Suella Braverman keep trumpeting. It's to do with completely shutting out any sort of asylum claims whatsoever. And it's fascinating. For example, at the moment, the lack of responsibility that we are taking Britain as a country for migrants coming here. For, if you look at the largest demographic currently coming to Britain via small boats, for example, it's people from Afghanistan. And this is a direct result of the UK's failed evacuation of Afghanistan, of the failed mission that happened in Afghanistan. It was catastrophic. It left thousands of people behind. And the promise of safe immigration routes for Afghanistan's resettlement schemes has just not materialised. The only pathway currently open to the UK for Afghanistanis has managed to who are not already here, has managed to resettle just 22 people. And that also already, this number of people that I could resettle was about 20,000. So you look at the responsibilities we have, we're not even enacting those. And still we have this backbench rebellion, this forcible, and Sunak is constantly focused on his internal war in the party rather than actually representing human rights, but also the wider concerns of the country. If you look at the wider population, I think more people care about healthcare than they do about people coming on small boats. It has been magnified into an issue that is
it's on the front pages of a lot of the newspapers tomorrow, including the Times. Anna, the puppet for this rebellion is apparently the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman.
Yes, this is, again, I thought this was a fascinating take by the Times here, because essentially what this story is saying, and this is Whitehall insiders, which again, an interesting term because that means somebody's briefing against Suella Braverman. But what they're saying is that she's a sock puppet. In other words, she's hand in glove with these rebels. She agrees with these rebels and she is working quietly with them because she agrees with them, in sharp contrast to Rishi Sunak. And so it's going to be interesting to see how all of that plays out. But Braverman is very hardline on all of this. She tried to make sure that some of these amendments that the rebels are going to put forward apparently were in the bill, and she failed there because Sunak doesn't agree with her. But again, it shows you the real tussle that is going on. But I thought that was an astonishing piece of briefing against the Home Secretary from people within government. And I just wonder whether or not Sunak realises that Suella Braverman is really not fit to be the Home Secretary.
Well, Anna, Moya, thank you for the moment. That story, one to watch this week, as the illegal migration bill heads to the Commons this week. Stay with us, because coming up after the break, we're going to be discussing drastic NHS staff shortages, which could get even worse in the year to come. Join us for that and more after the break. Hello, welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Joining me tonight, Moya Lothian-Mclean and Anna Soubry. We're going to head straight back to the front pages that are coming into us here at Sky News. And we're going to go to The Guardian first. NHS chiefs sound alarm on spiralling staff shortages. This is The Guardian exclusive. A call for radical homegrown recruitment drive to avoid a shortfall of 571,000 NHS staff within the next 13 years. Anna, the shocking thing about this is that perhaps nobody is surprised by these numbers.
Yes. Well, I don't know. I mean, actually, that's an extraordinary figure. So anyway, the Guardian's got hold of this long-awaited workforce plan, which still hasn't been published, but the Guardian has got hold of it. And the figures are quite extraordinary. We're going to have a shortfall of 28,000 GPs, for example, and it's 44,000 shortfall of community nurses. And then in 13 years' time, over 500,000 effectively vacancies. So this is just in NHS England, by the way. This is not doesn't include Wales and Scotland as well. So it just shows you the real challenge that our NH has in both the retention of staff, but most importantly, recruiting staff in the numbers that we need. And what The Guardian also says that the report is saying is that we can't rely on two things. One, overseas, people coming from overseas to work in our NHS. Personally, of course, I think we should be great if we could have some of those EU workers back. But we can't obviously fill these sorts of gaps with people from overseas. And the second thing which they say, which is really important, is that this is going to cost us a great deal of money, and we've got to put that finance in order to meet these shortfalls.
Moya, it says a recent draft of the plan reveals that the NHS is already operating with 154,000 fewer full-time staff than it needs, far more than the 124,000 official figure. The NHS is already operating, far below expected standards in terms of being able to work efficiently, properly and safely.
Yeah, I think this is part of the wider crumbling of the NHS, which links in also with the lack of political will to actually full on address the crisis. So within this report, there's also an interesting tidbit about an alleged war between Jeremy Hunt's Treasury and Steve Barclay's Health Ministry, where Barclay is willing to spend the money, but Hunt is not, that it would take to train up these homegrown staff. Instead of spending billions on training up and bringing in staff from overseas or temporary staff, but it seems in the short term, there's this will to sort of patch up, nowhere near that we need, to try and make up the shortfall in private agencies, in private staff and agency staff. I think in 2022, in Labour Party FOI revealed there'd been 4.6 billion spent on agency doctors in the last 5 years, and at least £5,000 spent for single agency doctor shifts. So there's this willingness to spend on the short term, but there's not this willingness to fund the NHS with one big splurge of billions, perhaps because of how the optics would look to the Conservative base. And because of that, it's just creaking along and ever more parts are falling off. So we're going to see this continuing until that political will is there to actually address the crisis in the way it needs, which is funding for staff.
Let's just take a look at this story inside the Metro. It's been a story that's been around all day today. And this is a former health secretary and a former chancellor asking for £1,500 per hour for advisory work outside their jobs as ministers. And Anna, this is particularly bad timing when you think of the cost of living crisis and the story we've just been talking about, when you've got junior doctors who are on £14 an hour asking for £19 an hour, and you've got two ministers here in full-time employment on three-figure salaries asking for £1,500 per hour. It's not good, is it? It's not breaking any rules, I should say. It's not breaking any rules, but it's not a good look.
No, it isn't. Well, of course, it's not a good look, but you're absolutely right. It doesn't actually break the rules. I mean, members of parliament can do those second jobs. They can charge whatever amount that they want to. I find it extraordinary that those two particular people think that they are worth £1,500 an hour. I mean, it's just extraordinary.
You've been there, Anna. Should the rule on allowing second jobs, should that be ripped up? Should that not be allowed? Or is there a credible case for arguing that MPs can have second jobs? Why do they need them?
I think there is. I mean, I never had a second job, but there are some members of parliament, for example, there's a Labour health minister who works shifts in A&E. I don't have any problem with that at all. I think it's fantastic. Rosanna brings real experience.
That's Rosanna Ali Khan, the Labour MP, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Maria Caulfield, who's a health minister, she works as a nurse and does shifts there. And then there are people who write. Rachel Reeves has written the most brilliant book looking at women, the politicians. There's a wonderful biography at the moment about Harold Wilson, written by another politician. I don't have a problem with that, member of parliament. I don't have a problem with that. And of course, because the ultimate test is what your electorate thinks, your constituents think. And it's difficult to see how Kwasi Kwarteng is going to be able to
I just want to bring in Moya for a quick word on this, because Moya, from the outside looking in, what's your view on MPs having second jobs?
I think when the second jobs rule was brought in, it was a very different context than it is now. MPs earn a huge salary and the abuse of second jobs has been manifest. So I think for now, they should be scrapped.
OK, Moya, good to hear your thoughts, and Anna as well. Anna making a good case for some second jobs that are meaningful and add something. Others do not. Moya thinks it should be a total ban. Thank you both very much indeed.